there's one book that came out in
There it is.
1980, the Star Wars Empire Strikes Back sketchbook by Joe Johnston and Nilo Rodis Jamero. Now, what this book has is a lot of sketches for Empire Strikes Back done by Joe. And when we get to the page about Boba Fett, I'm going to read this. Because here we go. This is the first time we see in print the word Mandalorian. Originally, the Boba Fett costume was intended to be worn by a squad of super commandos, there's that word, super commandos, troops from the Mandalore system armed with weapons built into their suits. Now, this book came out in 1980. This predates the Marvel Comics by 3 years. Actually, we found out that Marvel Comics, even though it was dated March 83, it was released in December 82.
Okay.
So, but in that, to me, I think that's the first time we see the word Mandalorian used in a fictional sense.
Story, yeah.
But this is the first time we actually see the word used in print anywhere. And you told us that you were going to check in with George Lucas himself to find out whether or not George was the one who came up with the word Mandalorian or Mandalore.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely true.
That is true. That came from George.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, and see,
it is G level then.
Oh boy. Well, sure. Well, here we go. This makes total sense to me because as a kid, I had this book.
Yeah.
I have no idea how I got this book. I think it was a Christmas present. Mm-hmm. It was one of those times when you get Christmas presents and you get like a speeder and an AT-AT and a snowtrooper and a book, and you're like, a book, great. So I'm going back to the speeder and the AT-AT. And then later, the day is worn on, you kind of start flipping through the book, and you're like, that's really cool. Wow, that's really... And, you know, just inspired. Mm-hmm. Everything in that book is so great. I love the artwork. Obviously, this page here is where I had to get these eyes on Captain Rex.
Yeah, you're talking about the two symbols that are on the forehead of the Boba Fett helmet in this concept drawing.
Yeah, because I remember this page. It was like burned into my head as a kid. I thought all these symbols were really cool. So it completely makes sense that I would have read that page as a kid because you're going for any kind of information you can get, and there's the word Mandalore. So then when you're talking to your friends, you say, well, that's Mandalorian armor. And thus it grew and grew and grew and grew. And so that makes sense to me as far as where I heard it. Then what I wanted to know was, well, and see, the connection to George is implicit then to me because this book is really ahead of its time in that it's coming right from the artists like Joe Johnston and Ralph McQuarrie. It's coming directly from Lucasfilm, them putting it together. And most of the words and things used way back then, they could only come from George. When you look at, you know, some of the larger Journey of the Wills scripts and stuff, there are words like Aqualayan, even Mace Windu. They all appear and they repeat over time. Mandalore was one of these words. Mandalore at different times was a planet that was replacing Alderaan and being destroyed by the Death Star. Mm-hmm. So it was one of the words that got played around with, and then it ended up landing on these super commandos for, Boba Fett.
That's really
interesting.
interesting.
The plan was that they were, there were going to be a whole group of them, but it doesn't, again, when you're making films, the story pans out for different reasons than when you write books or different stories. We kind of touched upon earlier, you have certain needs, and so, I mean, you even see the concept trooper white, being worn by people at Lucasfilm modeling the costume. So you can see early intentions of what it might have been. But if you've ever seen the Boba Fett costume up close, you know right away that it's a far more robust costume than the Stormtrooper. So right there, that tells me that while Boba Fett as a super commander was a great idea, it probably, at least to me as a filmmaker, isn't as cost-effective as making Stormtroopers. That's just me talking. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but for whatever reason, they abandoned the idea. It could have been just for the plot; they didn't need them, But it's an incredible costume. The actual helmet. I was down at the archives, and I've actually held the Boba Fett helmet. It's really heavy. It's not made like the Stormtrooper costumes. I think I thought the fire was functional on at one point because they were having fun making it. I think so. If you look, Pablo Hidalgo has that stuff. Mm-hmm. He has a video of it, so you can grill him about it. But there you go. I talked to George about it. It was one of the times. I don't really bug him about a lot of that stuff. I don't like to. It's his universe. I go kind of where he wants to take it. But I had an opening, and I thought of you too, and you'd get on my case about it if I didn't answer him. So I asked him about it. I bugged him about it, and yeah, he was very amiable about the answer. It's just pretty matter of fact. And again, that's how I know it's one of his things. He knew the word.
Right.
He knew what it was. He had an origin of it, and it's a creator talking about words they created to tell a story. The same as he created Chewbacca or Wookiee. And again, I always take it back to that level. It's very hard 30 years later for people to remember this guy created the concept of the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
Of Chewbacca. It's the same guy. It's not like we're talking about someone that's not around anymore and this all runs rampant. It's the same guy doing it. And I get all my information on Clone Wars from him. I can pitch him ideas and say, let's do certain things. But at the end of the day, he will say yes or he will say no. And then that is the way it's going to go. And when he says no, or I can test him about something, my object is not to make him see it my way. I mean, it's ridiculous. He created Star Wars.
Right.
My objective becomes then, why is it that way? I want to understand it.
Right.
And again, I'll always go back to the biggest case for me when I started the show is, why does Anakin have a Padawan? What's that about? And when you understand that it's an attempt by the Jedi to recognize the fact that Anakin has certain problems, that he has this attachment issue, that he needs to learn, and by giving him a student that becomes a warrior that will be self-reliant, he could get over the idea that she's defenseless and fight for herself and let her go. That's a powerful message for that character. And of course Anakin would go through that. We too often stick these characters in the narrow focus that we know.
Right.
Too often we write stories in our mind or whatever that's based solely on the experience that we have with them, and forget that, just like our own lives, they have this wide berth that they can travel on. They could do many things off of the main plot. So there's a lot of fertile ground, which I think, the EU does a great job with, telling those stories, like Darth Maul Shadowhunter.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
There's so many great stories out there. So there you go. There's your answer. I did that for you.
Thank you, Dave.
That's your Christmas present. I don't expect anything in the mail. That's the whole thing.
Well, that was worth it.
There
So
you go.
I think we can say case closed on Mandalorians.
Yes, until Pablo or Leland Chi calls us.
Yeah, right.
Then we'll know differently.
Hey, this is Dave Filoni of Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you are listening to Rebel Force Radio with Jason and Jimmy.